Battle of Kosare. April 9, 1999, an ominous clash unraveled, as the Battle of Kosare cast its grim shadow, pitting the relentless Yugoslav forces against the so-called Kosovo Liberation Army, KLA, near the Yugoslav-Albanian border from April 9 to June 10, 1999. The battle took place on the towering slopes of the unique and Prohetlje mountains, echoing with the chilling cries. This happened in 1999 when the violence in Kosovo reached a critical point. International forces stepped in to intervene. In response to the escalating crisis, NATO launched airstrikes on Yugoslavia, including Kosovo. The objective of the attack from the Albanian side in Operation Arrow was to achieve a ground invasion of Kosovo and Metohija. This operation involved an Albanian offensive aimed at gaining control over the region and driving out Yugoslav military and police units from Kosovo and Metohija. On April 9, 1999, the bloodiest battle of the Kosovo War flared at the Kosare military outpost at 3 in the morning. A massive artillery fire began from the Albanian side towards the Marina border post, where a feigned attack was staged to divert the attention of the Yugoslav army intervention units in that direction. Around 4:30 in the morning, the fire shifted to the Kosare border post, accompanied by a large-scale assault by the terrorist KLA, Kosovo Liberation Army, infantry. The fire was opened by the regular Albanian army forces, targeting the border positions of the Yugoslav army. The attack involved the use of cannons, howitzers, and mortars, with well-trained members of the French Foreign Legion coordinating the artillery fire. The Albanians launched their attack in 3 directions. I visited the positions, then gave additional tasks to the soldiers, and we talked about tomorrow being April 9th, the most significant Christian holiday. I was informed that the artillery of the Albanian army was engaging our positions in the area of the Marina border post. We immediately concluded that it was the beginning of a ground aggression. All of our attention was focused on the Marina border post, which is the left neighbor of the Kosare border post. Recalls Dushko Shivanchanin, who was a major and the commander of the 53rd Border Battalion of the Yugoslav Army during that war in 1999. In the early morning hours, between 5 and 6 o'clock, the defense positions in the area of the Kosare border post were targeted by NATO aviation and artillery from Albania. At that moment, it became clear to us that the actions towards the Marina border post were merely demonstrative, while the main forces in the main direction of the attack were aimed at the Kosare border post. Those were the initial moments of the Battle of Kosare, which is now known as one of the most famous battles in the defense of the country during the NATO aggression on the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. For years, there was little discussion about it, but in recent years, authentic testimonies have been collected on the subject. At that moment, there were approximately 130 soldiers stationed at the Kosare border post, including personnel such as cooks and signalers. The majority of soldiers at that time were young conscripts, aged between 18 and 22, who were serving their compulsory military service. They were deployed along a 13-kilometer stretch. During the artillery shelling, approximately 1,500 members of the KLA managed to approach the border unnoticed. Major Dushko, along with soldier Miroslav Stojanovic, set off in a vehicle towards the village of Batusha to meet the military police unit. In the vicinity of that village, Stojanovic, the driver, was hit by a sniper shot to the head, becoming the first casualty of the Battle of Kosare. Dushko exited the vehicle amid a hail of bullets, sustaining multiple gunshot wounds. After receiving treatment at a hospital in Jakovica, he returned to the command post. The bloody battle lasted throughout the day with heavy casualties, especially on the attacker's side. In the afternoon, the KLA managed to capture the peak of Mount Raza Kosare and immediately switched to a defensive tactic. This allowed them to bring several artillery pieces to that position. The fighting continued throughout the night until the afternoon of the following day. At that point, with the assistance of artillery fire, the KLA captured Mayaglava and continued shelling the Kosare border post. The Yugoslav army soldiers were forced to abandon the post in the afternoon. Around 7 p.m., the KLA entered the abandoned border post. The first 2 days of the battle were critical. Fighting at Kosare were the combat groups of the 63rd Parachute Brigade, 72nd Special Brigade, elements from other units of the Yugoslav Army, and foreign volunteers, mainly from Russia. Under enemy fire, Lance Corporal Vladan Avramovic, a squad leader in the 53rd Border Battalion, found himself in a challenging situation. I started moving towards the mortar positions through a steep and rocky terrain, which was covered with pine trees. As I ran, one of the terrorists noticed me, and suddenly a tremendous gunfire erupted. Mortars, rifle shots were coming from all directions. My goal was to reach the mortars as quickly as possible and start firing. Bullets were whizzing between my legs, near my ears, hitting the surrounding rocks. At one point, I think a bullet grazed the sole of my boot and I fell down, unable to move any further. That's when the firing stopped. I stayed in that position for a while and then I crawled towards the mortars, recalls Avramovic. Soon after, his soldiers unleashed a barrage of mortar shells at the enemy, firing 130 projectiles in about an hour. Yugoslav commanders immediately started employing tactics over the radio to create the impression that they were commanding multiple battalions, giving the false impression of a larger force than they actually had. This was a strategy to deceive the enemy and confuse them. Knowing that the radio communications were being intercepted by the enemy, the Yugoslav army came up with a clever idea to utilize the 12 soldiers of Roma ethnicity. These soldiers would receive commands and relay them via radio communication in Romani, using street slang, in order to prevent American and Albanian translators from understanding them. This tactic aimed to maintain the secrecy and security of their communications. The Yugoslav army forces withdrew towards a second line of defense below the border post, to positions that were easier to defend. Reinforcements in terms of personnel and artillery arrived from the Yugoslav army during the following day. A group of KLA members positioned themselves above the Yugoslav army's positions to disrupt and cut off communications, managing to destroy one combat vehicle. During the night, the KLA attacked the Yugoslav army's positions on the top of Oplas, attempting to break the soldiers' resistance. However, all the attacks were repelled with significant losses on the attackers' side, despite the support of Albanian artillery. In the following days, the KLA attempted to break the resistance of the Yugoslav army's second line of defense, but these attacks were also unsuccessful. The Yugoslav Army Command decided to launch a surprise counterattack. On April 14th, the soldiers of the Yugoslav Army initiated an attack on Maja Glava. The distance between the two opposing trenches was no more than 50 meters. The Yugoslav Army was not able to fully capture Maja Glava, but they managed to disrupt the Albanian artillery operations from that position. On May 10th, the Yugoslav Army Command sent 2 T-55 tanks to support the offensive on Raza Kosare. When the tanks crossed the terrain that was almost impassable for combat vehicles, they managed to capture less than 100 meters of territory, but the KLA still held Raza Kosare. During the night between May 10th and 11th, NATO aviation dropped cluster bombs, prohibited by the Geneva Conventions, on Yugoslav army soldiers attacking KLA positions below Raza Kosare, killing 8 soldiers and 1 officer, and injuring over 40. This allowed the KLA to repel the Yugoslav army forces from that position to their initial positions. In mid-May, there were major battles for the control of Hill Marchai, which was captured by the Yugoslav army, while the KLA suffered significant losses. The KLA had to withdraw from those positions, and by taking control of that position, the Yugoslav army gained a tactical advantage on the terrain for coordinating artillery fire. This success allowed the Yugoslav army to stabilize the area and keep the attackers outside of the defense lines. The bloody battle in Kosare lasted until June 10th without significant changes. The war in Kosovo and Metohija lasted until June 10th, 1999, when the Kumanovo Agreement was signed, and the Yugoslav army and Serbian police withdrew together with the soldiers who participated in the Battle of Kosare. NATO entered Kosovo under the name KFOR as a peacekeeping force, while the KLA officially was disarmed. Aftermath. The Battle of Kosare claimed many lives on both sides. 108 members of the Yugoslav army were killed. The official casualties of the KLA were around 200 dead, but it is believed that there were many more. Official information states that 3 foreign nationals were killed in Kosare. During the battle, 5 Albanian tanks were destroyed and the tank offensive was broken.